All right, everybody. Training camp is coming up. So, what we decided to do is we're going to hit you with a 3-part training camp preview. Part 1 is today, where we're going to outline the best case, the worst case, and the most realistic scenario for the guard room. Part 2, part 3, we'll focus on the wings, we'll focus on the bigs. Today, we're talking about the guards. So, let's stop messing around and scream with envy. Let's lock in. What up? What up? What up? Welcome into another edition of Green with Envy. As I mentioned, this is part 1 of our 3-part training camp preview series. Today, we are focusing on the guard room of the Boston Celtics. As always, is your boy Will. We are checking in. How you doing? How you living? Joining me today, as he does each and every time, my best friend, co-host, and the coach of our podcast, the one and only Greg Manakis. Greg, I'm excited to see what you're thinking about this team going in, because a lot of familiar faces. So we have a pretty intimate knowledge of everybody on this roster.
Yeah, I mean, when you told me we were going to do this training camp preview, I was excited because I've kind of put basketball on the back burner. One being summertime, two, the Olympics not really panning out for the Celtics as much as we wanted with Jason Tatum, and
Right.
three, with the baby boy, who probably should have been listed as one.
I was gonna
But
say that order. This is not meant to, don't take the order literal, folks. I think we all understood what you were describing.
But by the way, just quick side note, first day of daycare for the baby boy was today. Went well. Very emotional morning for your boy, dropping him off at daycare. It was very difficult to do. But shout out to Angels Daycare on South First here in Austin, Texas, for holding it down for baby James. He did a great job. Got all A+ on his report card. He's
Let's
already
go.
writing poetry. He's killing
He's
it.
a scholar.
He's a scholar. That's right. But yeah, with the Celtics training camp, looking at the guards, I think the most exciting part about this is that we don't have to worry too much about the guards, because we have the best defensive backcourt in the league and one of the most reliable bench guards in Payton Pritchard. So it's
Yeah.
really just like, for most of the team, since we didn't really make many moves, the training camp roster, as Joe Mazzulla said on John Corrales' pod, if you didn't listen to the interview with Corrales, go back an episode or two on our feed. Make sure you check that out. Is that most of the improvement this year is going to come from internal development, right? And that's what I'm most excited to see, what type of internal development happens for each of the guards on the roster.
Right, and that's going to hold true across all 3 previews that we do for the most part, right? Because this team is basically running it back. And so with that, let's just set this up real quick. So what we're going to do is we're going to break this down as to what's the best case scenario for this collective guard group. And we'll go into kind of some individuals. We'll talk about what's the worst case scenario. And we know, of course, injuries, other than, when we get to the bigs, we'll have to talk about it because it is going to be so prevalent with Kristaps Porzingis. This is always knowing injuries are the worst case scenario for everyone. So we're not going to harp on what if this guy gets injured or this type of injury. We don't know. We can't predict that. So we'll get into the best case, the worst case, and then we'll kind of see, where does that realistic case fall? Is it somewhere in the middle? Is it more towards the worst? Is it more towards the best? We'll kind of discuss that. But let's set it up here, Greg. I think there's really 6 main guards that we're going to be talking about that fill out the Celtics guard room. Of course, you already mentioned Derrick White, Jrue Holiday, and Payton Pritchard. Those are kind of the staples, right? Those are the 3 main guards that were part of the championship run. Jaden Springer, who was acquired right around the trade deadline from the Philadelphia 76ers. Obviously, people got a little bit of a closer look at him for the beginning portion of Summer League. And so there is definitely some excitement with Jaden Springer. Lonnie Walker, who was recently signed on an Exhibit A, Exhibit C, some letter
Exhibit 10.
contract here, Exhibit 10, a number, but whatever. You get the point what I'm saying here. And, John Corrales, you mentioned in that interview, he seems really high on Lonnie Walker potentially making a splash and being surprised that, that type of training camp deal is all Lonnie Walker was getting. So we'll talk about him. And then JD Davison, who just seems to be the perpetual guy on a 2-way contract that's just constantly at the end of the Celtics bench. We will touch on him as well. So that is the group of 6 that we're talking about. When we get into the forwards or into the wings and into the big men, we'll kind of do the same thing and lay it all out. But Let's start with best case scenario here, Greg. And also, actually, as we're recording this, the first guy I want to talk about is Derrick White. Have you seen the blasphemy that happened to Derrick White over the weekend?
I think when he got hit with the football.
Well, he got hit with a hand across his face. Some dude in the stands, he got into an argument, and some dude hit him across the head.
What?
People are attacking Derrick White in the streets, and we will not fucking stand for it. You do not come at Derrick
Great
White.
white buffalo?
The,
People are attacking great white buffalo. Aren't they an endangered species?
I don't know what the fuck's happening, but Colorado, you need to get your shit together, get your security together, because nobody comes at Derrick White. All right. So that's first and foremost. We can't have this happen. So let's get Derrick White back to Boston. Let's get him back to safety here, because I did not enjoy seeing that video that TMZ put out about like an hour ago before we're recording this here. So yeah, Colorado, get your fucking shit together. That's number one. Now, back to basketball, back to on-court here. Let's kind of go player by player here, Greg. We don't have to spend too much time going too deep on the guys that we really know, but with Derrick White, there's certain things that you're just going to get with Derrick White. You're going to get a guy that moves the ball. You're going to get a guy defensively. I don't even know how you predict a worst case scenario for Derrick White in that term. I think for me, for the best case scenario of getting the absolute most out of Derrick White, it's what we've seen him really develop already his first 2 full seasons in Boston, is that 3-point shot really being a weapon, in which over the last 2 years he's shot 38, 39%, which have been career highs from 3. And so the next level of that progression is just continuing that to be a massive weapon, because I know going into last year it was all right, 38 versus, I think before that his career high was around 34, 35%. It's like, it's a pretty big jump. Like, is this real? And it's sure as hell, except for when he goes on JJ Redick's podcast, which now he's the coach of the Lakers. That's not going to happen. You know, it felt pretty damn real. And he shot right around just over 39%, I believe, from 3-point range. And so it's just, does that maintain? Does that even grow to a 40, 41%? Like, that's the best case for Derrick, because a lot of his skill sets that he brings to this team and is such a connector, such an accentuator of everything else that happens on this team on both sides of the ball. It's kind of hard for those to deteriorate. So it's really, for me, you know, does that career high in 3-point shooting, does that continue to grow, or at least maintain at that level of that 38, 39%?
Yeah, I mean, with Derrick White, he's exceeded our expectations since we got him in the trade when everybody was excited to get Derrick White. But I don't think even diehard basketball fans like us quite realized, diehard basketball fans living in Texas quite realized how effective Derrick White would be for this team and how he's a perfect fit. He's the Marcus Smart replacement, all that stuff that, we started to think about when we got Derrick White. And then obviously Jrue Holiday, who we're going to talk about next, kind of allowed that to kind of manifest in greater detail in the 2023-24 season, because no Marcus Smart means Derrick White is elevated to the starting lineup and elevated to a much more prominent role within that starting lineup, right? And I think with D White, the one thing that really stands out to me is how consistent he's been in terms of games played throughout his career. Like, he's pretty much over 65 games every single year, aside from the COVID season, 2020, 2021. I think he had a knee injury that year. I was trying to look it up really quickly as you were talking, but he only played 36 games in that shortened season. But I think with Derrick White, best case scenario, not only does he continue to improve just his shooting and his overall confidence with this team and being the clutch player for this team, but also he continues to work on his body and no stray hands come hitting him in Colorado and knock him out for a season with concussion.
Yeah, that's like right. Like the that freak scenario is like that's something to the level of what would have to happen for Derrick White to kind of let us down. Like you said, Greg, how many times last year did we say, close your eyes and imagine who hits the biggest shot for the Boston Celtics? And it was Derrick White time and time again. And so I think it's just him building upon that is his best case scenario. Let's go to his backcourt, man. Let's go to Jrue Holiday, because Jrue Holiday is at a very different place in his career. And I'll let you start this one. When you think of best case scenario for the upcoming season, just looking at this season for Jrue Holiday, what does that look like for you?
Well, when you think about Jrue Holiday on the Olympic team and how big of a role he played on that Olympic team when a guy like Jason Tatum is on the bench, and when you extend Jrue Holiday last season so that I think he's got 3 more years with the Celtics now.
Mm-hmm.
With Jrue, you hope that, the decline isn't a steep decline whenever that decline happens. So best case scenario with Jrue is that we're getting like 1 or 2 more years, specifically this year, because of all the, salary stuff that's going to happen with this team. This is really the window for this team to win another title. So Jrue Holiday finishing out the peak of his prime, right? You saw on Team USA, he's very much still regarded as the best perimeter defender in the entire world. So if he can give the Celtics 1 more year of being that guy, then I think that's all Celtics fans could hope for, because if the Celtics win 2 championships in this Jrue Holiday window that we have, in the Kristaps Porzingis window that we have, I'm all for it, man. That sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah, and I think for me, I'll take the other side of the ball as to what would be the best case for Jrue Holiday this year. And I think if you look at after we knew KP was going to be out for a while, so let's take out the Miami series and let's look at the last 3 postseason series. And during the regular season, Jrue Holiday was averaging just over 12 points per game. That jumped up to 15 in those last 3 playoff series. And his field goal percentage, and this is really where the biggest difference was, is he went from a 48% shooter to a 54% shooter. And a lot of that was just finishing more of those attempts that he had around the basket. He was doing a lot more of kind of playing in that dunker spot in certain scenarios in the playoffs. And so as we know that KP is going to be out, and this was something that last year I had talked about off and on when KP was out, but it was 1 game here, 2 games here. There wasn't a consistent stretch. This is going to be a pretty healthy stretch until probably sometime in January, February-ish. We'll see whenever KP comes back, in which Holiday is going to need to be anywhere from the second, third, or definitely the fourth scorer on certain nights for this team. And so you're going to need a little bit more of that offensive output that he was used to putting up in Milwaukee. Now, he's not going to be the same burden because you have the Jays who, you mentioned with Derrick White. These guys don't miss time. Derrick White does not miss time. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, they almost never miss time. So most nights he is going to be okay being that 4th role, but there are going to be nights where he needs to be that 2nd or 3rd guy. And so I do think he needs to be, whether it's just being more efficient or even when it calls for it, having a slightly higher volume in his arsenal offensively. I think that's going to be something to kind of watch out for. And, as we talk about when we get to the worst case scenario, for him, it's just going to be kind of keeping an eye on his age, right? He's just coming off playing all the way through the championship and then going and playing in the Olympics, where he played unlike Jason Tatum, he played a very vital role in that team. And he was playing relatively big minutes when you think about Olympic minutes and how that minute distribution goes. And so it's just a lot of basketball on a guy who's approaching now his mid 30s. And so I think for me, the best case scenario is that his offensive output from an efficiency standpoint can closer mirror what we saw the last 3 rounds of the playoffs than maybe what we had throughout the regular season, just because KP is going to be out for such a longer stretch. And you're just going to need guys that have, can put the ball in the basket more. You still got to score points to go ahead and win these games. And so Jrue's going to need to be probably more of like a 13, 14 point guy, maybe somewhere in that range, just for that stretch until KP gets back on the court.
Yeah, and I think, that kind of leads me into talking about the next guy, Payton Pritchard, because with Jrue Holiday and his increasing age, right, just like the Celtics started to make some adjustments in terms of Al Horford's minutes over the last couple of years, I don't think Jrue Holiday is quite at that point where they're going to need to think about Jrue playing on back-to-backs or anything like that. He's a very well-conditioned athlete. He doesn't really miss time. He's had a few seasons where he's had some injuries, but who hasn't? I think with Payton Pritchard, allowing Joe Mazzulla the just like the freedom to play Payton Pritchard in games where maybe he doesn't feel like Jrue Holiday has it, or he doesn't feel like Derrick White has it, that Payton Pritchard can come in and give you 25 to 30 minutes and maybe Jrue only plays 20 minutes one night. Like, that's also a best case scenario to me in terms of that internal development. Because I think with Pritchard, he has, especially in the playoffs, he had such like a limited role. I would like to see him, although it's a consistent role, it's limited, right? So I want to see him get a little bit more of an opportunity to really cook this year on the offensive side of the ball, because as you mentioned, without Porzingis, other people need to step up. And I think Pritchard has the talent to become like a Fred VanVleet light. I've always compared him to VanVleet. I don't think he can quite reach that point where he's going to be making $40 million a year at any point in his career. But I think Payton Pritchard can definitely be, like his white on white comparison. TJ McConnell is one of the best backup point guards in the league. There's no reason why Payton Pritchard can't come in with a very similar motor, a very similar tempo to his game, and come in and really make a difference, just pushing the ball any chance he gets, gnashing along the baseline, setting up his teammates, running an effective pick and roll, and then being a great spot up shooter if he plays off of Tatum or Brown.
Yeah, and Pritchard, another guy, played all 82 games last year. Another guy that just does not miss time. He's tough, he's scrappy. And I think for me, when you think about Pritchard, last year and in the playoffs, he became more of a little bit of a specialist. And that's, to be honest, likely to be the case again this year, depending on what matchups look like. But in the regular season, he's a guy that, like you said, can easily play 25, 30 minutes a game, and that wouldn't, on certain nights, and that wouldn't be an issue. And I think this year, and this is going to be true of a lot of players on the Celtics team, he's going to come in with a different level of confidence. Playing in all 82 games last year, you go back to the beginning of last season, this is one of my big things for Payton Pritchard, is getting back to being a true 40% shooter from three. He's been a little bit below that mark over the last 2 years. And you go back to Joe Mazzulla year one, and it wasn't contentious, but obviously we heard reports of Payton Pritchard wants out. He's like, I don't know what my role is here. Some nights he was in, sometimes he was out, and you could tell it was weighing on his confidence. And to start last year, he got off to a really slow start from three. Like, I think he had a pretty good preseason. We were all pretty excited about Payton Pritchard, and then he just got off to a really slow start. He shot 24% from three over the first 13 games last season, eventually clawed that back up to about 38%. But I think, he was still in his head a little bit about, like, how's Mazzulla going to utilize me. Towards the end of the year, it was very clear. There's, an 8-man hierarchy on this Celtics team. You have the starters. You have, if everyone's healthy, Al's coming off Al and Sam are the first two established coming off the bench. And then it was Payton. Payton was very clearly that eighth guy. And I think, when you think about repeating and the long runs that's going to take, when you think of, even over the last couple of years, you're going from a finals run to Eastern Conference Finals Game 7 to another finals run. Throw in there that, 3 of your guys were also part of an Olympic run. Like, you're going to need, some of these guys are going to have, weeks or, time here or there. It's like, I need a break, and I need someone to give me some, I don't have the juice that you need from me right now. Payton needs to be that guy. And I think for him, part of his best case scenario is getting off to a hot start and getting him back up to that range of being that 40, 41, 42% three-point flamethrower that, once again, can backfill these points that we're not going to have available from KP, and going to need a few nights from Payton Pritchard to get hot.
Real quick, before you transition, I also want to just bring up with Pritchard, he also has one of the more tradable contracts on the roster, and the Celtics are hamstrung by being an apron team, right? So they can't, when they're making a trade, they can't aggregate salaries this year. So Payton Pritchard making about $8-9 million a year. If they see that there's another area of need on this team, like say, like one of the guys like Springer or Lonnie Walker doesn't pan out, that we're going to talk about here in a second, Pritchard's one of those guys that if there's another guy making just under whatever Payton Pritchard is making, the Celtics might need to move off somebody like Pritchard. So if he doesn't play up to the standard that we hope he can reach as the backup guard on this team, like, I think Pritchard is also kind of playing for his spot on this team.
Yeah, and I think honestly it's a great point, because the value of his contract, that holds true not even just for this year, but we talked about with Corrales in that last episode a couple episodes ago here. Like, next year the tax bill doubles, right? Like, so this is going to be an overarching plot line of this season of, hey, if things aren't working out right now, you need, like, as long as you're winning, whatever, we're gonna have to the ownership, however that shakes out, they're gonna have to deal with it for what it is. But if a player is not living up to that extension, even if it's Payton Pritchard and we're talking $9 million versus, a $70 million, $60 million contract for the Jays that you're not going to do anything with, Payton Pritchard, this is a guy, like you said, that could be moved, whether it's this year, could be in the offseason next year if they start to shed salary. That's a way to kind of do it. So you're totally right in that for Payton Pritchard, he's playing for a spot here, but he's also kind of auditioning for teams that are like, all right, I'm going to go try to get this guy because I might be able to get him on the cheap. And so it is a potential scenario that is going to behoove, obviously, Payton Pritchard. Better he plays, more opportunities going to get either here or could be down the line elsewhere. Let's go. You mentioned Jaden Springer and Lonnie Walker. We can kind of loop them in together here, I think, as part of best case scenario. Because I think they're the next. With Jaden Springer, we've talked about it before. Like, I think he can be a guy that can come in and be super disruptive with his athleticism. His biggest thing is just what can he do offensively, right? Because that's if he's going to get any type of meaningful minutes or be able to give you additional opportunities to find rest either in game or sit guys like Derrick White or Jrue Holiday to get them some extra rest. Like Jaden Springer, what he can give you on the offensive end, that's going to be his big best case scenario. Can he hit open threes at a mid-30s clip? He hasn't even had enough opportunities to even really look at his stats and say, here's what we need him to replicate. Like we just know he doesn't have a good shot. He's super athletic. Defensively, he brings a ton of energy, and that's where he's going to make his name, is making energy plays that kind of lead to him getting more opportunities.
I'm going to kind of take a different approach to this conversation. And I'm going to talk about, rather than for the Celtics, I'm going to talk about for Jaden Springer and what is actually the best case scenario for him personally. And I don't think it's with the Celtics. I just really don't. I think that Springer, although I like him as a player, his best case scenario for him would be probably being traded elsewhere into the Celtics getting a trade exception back. He's got about a $4 million contract. He was actually listed by Bleacher Report on September 16th. Well, I don't know if you saw this. They, who was it? Zach Buckley, was that the name of the guy who wrote it? And what they mentioned was that Jaden Springer, sorry, I got thing playing on my screen. Jaden Springer was listed as the player with the most to prove for the Boston Celtics. Of all the guys on the roster, Jaden Springer was listed by Bleacher Report as the most to prove for the Boston Celtics. And I think with him, he's just not going to get that opportunity with this team. I don't think he has the 3-point shot where he's going to be able to earn space in Missoula ball on this roster. So I would imagine that Jaden Springer is not on the team. That would be kind of a prediction that I'm going to make this year.
And you're saying by the end of the season, not necessarily out of camp, but you're saying by the end of the season, he might not be on the team.
I'm saying both. I don't think he makes it out of camp. Yeah.
Well, then that brings us to the next guy, which is Lonnie Walker, which, his worst case scenario, we know what it is. He doesn't make the team. That's the worst case scenario for Lonnie Walker. But, as when we had Corrales on the other day, he was saying he envisions potentially a world in which Lonnie Walker is, and I just mentioned it was pretty solidified that Payton Pritchard was that 8th guy most nights throughout the regular season last year, that maybe Lonnie Walker could be that 8th guy, and that if he's not that 8th guy, he's probably that 9th guy, which would be kind of the O'Shea Brissett type role, different players, but as far as rotation goes. And, I think with Lonnie Walker, this once again comes back to the KP discussion of how do you find those extra buckets on a night-to-night basis? Part of that is everybody just kind of stepping up. And then you need a guy, somewhat similar to where Payton Pritchard can pop. Lonnie Walker's a bit of a scorer, right? Like he is a guy that can get hot. He's had a couple big nights against the Celtics. We've seen it happen. We've seen it happen. Yeah, we've seen it happen in the playoffs with the Lakers a couple years ago. Like he's still young enough that he's got upside. And so, number one, I really like the signing for the Celtics. Why not? Right. Like, there's no downside to it for the Celtics. But from a Lonnie Walker perspective, this could be an area where his scoring burst would be his best way to contribute. And then for himself, either find himself on a, as a potential, trade chip later in the season, set himself up for success.
Yeah, I mean I think Lonnie Walker is going to make the team, man. 3 years under Pop, I think is something that's important in this discussion. Greg Popovich, very influential coach, obviously in the NBA. There's probably a reason why he didn't stick in San Antonio, because Lonnie Walker didn't really pan out with the Spurs, despite being a kind of highly touted draft pick for them. He had a decent year with the Lakers. As you mentioned, he had that one big playoff moment back in 22-23 where he was really hooping that one game. I think he dropped like 20 points off the bench. But he played 56 games for the Lakers that year, played 58 games for the Nets last year. With the Spurs, he played 61, 60, and 70 in his 3 years in San Antonio, where he was actually getting minutes. He's a guy that being 25 years old and being such a low risk contract for the Celtics, I think that they look at him and the punch that he can add off the bench with scoring. And at times, the Celtics can kind of feel like they're lacking that one extra scorer on the court.
Right.
Jaden Springer is not going to be that guy. There's enough defensive talent on this roster that we don't need Jaden Springer on this team, but we do need one extra scoring punch. And I think Lonnie Walker, you're getting a really good 10th man. Like, he's a better player for the role that they need than O'Shea Brissett is. He's a better player than Jaden Springer. He's a better player than Jordan Walsh. Anybody else on the roster, Lonnie Walker is probably the most talented, and I actually think he fits with this team for at least a year.
Yeah, I'm super excited to watch him in the preseason, because I think that's, for me, that's one of the more interesting moves that, or guys that can have an influence in the preseason, where we can say, see, look at this. This is something of, maybe not every night, but there's going to be certain nights where it's like, it's going to be really nice to have that in your tool belt, right? To be able to go to at certain points. Last guy here before we kind of run through the worst case scenario, even though we've touched on that throughout here, JD Davison. I mean, for me, best case is just, get out of the two-way deal, get onto the full-time roster. That's about it. That's all I got for JD. You got anything else you would add for JD Davison?
Yeah, just that he doesn't poop his pants this year.
Yeah, that's up. Massive. If he can poop his pants less than James, we're in good shape right there for our guy.
I mean, that's all you can really say about JD. He's a good player, runs a great pick and roll, is going to be, if he's with the main Celtics again, he's going to be awesome with the main Celtics.
He's another Jaden Springer, right? Yeah. Where it's like, your best case is not in Boston. It just isn't. There's just not room for what you can do. You seem like a nice enough player that maybe has back of the bench NBA potential, but it's just not going to be in Boston. There's not going to be a role for you. So
he might throw the best pick and roll lob to a rolling big on the entire roster. He runs a really nice pick and roll and has great chemistry with Keita.
Well, I was going to say, maybe that's his opportunity then, is because Keita certainly will be someone that we talk about a bunch when we get to the center part of this. So maybe that will be his opportunity. So if we go through this, and we touched on this a little bit, Greg, with just about everybody, the worst case scenario for a lot of these guys is basically just the opposite of what we're saying. And of course, we know injuries would also be in there as well. But when you look at, out of the worst case scenarios for some of these guys, what's one that sticks out to you that's, going to be more important than some of the other scenarios?
I think Derrick White, for sure. If he regresses back to more of a role player and less of a borderline all-star, that could be an issue for this team, because that was one of the secret sauces for this team, is that there were plenty of times in text messages between you and I where we were just asking, is Derrick White just our best player? He's freaking awesome. He's definitely the best player in his role on the team. I would say that, he plays his role perfectly, and he's got so much talent around him. It is the perfect situation for him, but he basically had a flawless year last year, minus one quick slump after his appearance on the JJ Redick podcast that you mentioned. I mean, if Derrick White kind of repeats his year of last year, great. That's awesome. If he regresses in any level, whether that's his playmaking, whether that's his defense, athleticism, shooting, if there's any sort of regression in there, even if it's his clutch gene, right? If all of a sudden he's not the clutch player that he was last year, that could be a really big impact on this team, because, as we said, close your eyes. Who's taking the big shot in the fourth quarter? It's Derrick White in our eyes. If he's not that guy this year, that's a really important piece, because nobody else on the team really inspires confidence down the stretch.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because, even for a guy like Jrue Holiday, who's now a two-time champion, two-time gold medalist, it's hard to envision him in the same way that we felt the confidence of Derrick White as that borderline all-star, sometimes our best player. It's Jrue's so great at what he does, but it's different in the leveling up sense, right? So it's just hard to envision that. And so for me, I'm actually going to go to, and it kind of, to a degree, goes hand in hand, right? Because if, let's say, Derrick White regresses from borderline all-star to just solid role player, right, which he's still productive, and let's say Payton Pritchard, that leaves more opportunities, but he's not making the most of them, right? That then puts an added pressure on Payton Pritchard to say, hey, man, you got to be even more efficient. You can't just be this specialist that hits half-court shots. That's great and all, but you have to be more than that. And so, if Payton Pritchard, to your point, he's showcasing himself to get more minutes on this team, but also like, hey, if it's not working out here, someone come get me, because the Celtics are going to want to shed salary. And, maybe next offseason they're like, listen, we'll take 2 second round, and that's probably pretty low for Payton Pritchard, but just for this hypothetical, give me 3 second round picks. Here's Payton Pritchard, so we get $9 million, which is really probably like $22 million off of our books with all the tax penalties that are coming in. Like, there's going to be, Payton Pritchard wants there to be demand. And so, is there a world in which he puts too much pressure on himself? Like, hey, Derrick or Jrue is struggling, or one of them's out. This is my time. It's the Payton Pritchard show. Let me go ahead and show everybody what I can do, and kind of overextends himself. Like, that's an area where I think that's part of the worst case scenario for Payton Pritchard. Of course, there could be the upside to it that he flourishes in that. But because we saw when he was unsure of how Mazzulla really felt about him and whether he was going to get consistent playing time, we saw that kind of get in his head a little bit. So I think there's definitely opportunity where it goes the other way, and that would be more towards the worst case scenario if we're looking at it from Payton Pritchard's perspective. And I think we've kind of covered it with Jaden Springer, and then Lonnie Walker. Just he doesn't make the team. That's everything that we're saying about being super excited to watch him in the preseason. It ends up going face up, belly up, and you're just like, all right, well, we're cutting ties. This is why he got an Exhibit 10, 9, 11 A, B, C contract, is because we wanted to have the freedom to be able to move off this and go elsewhere. And so that kind of brings us to the final part of this, Greg. Realistic scenario. So I feel like when I was envisioning us doing this preview, it's like, okay, here's the absolute best case. Here's the absolute worst case. In some scenarios, ideally realistic should fall right in the middle. But I think when we're looking at the way that, and you started this show off with the worst case scenario is we have 2 of the best defenders in the entire league on the perimeter in our backcourt, right? Like that's where we're starting. So for this particular group, when I look at what is the most realistic scenario out of everything that we just talked about from best to worst, it's somewhere in the ballpark of about 80% closer to the best case scenario. Like that's likely where this team is going, somewhere in that 80 to 85% of what we laid out as that best case. And that's especially for the 3 returning guards that are coming in here. And that's going to be Derrick White, Jrue Holiday, and Payton Pritchard to a lesser degree, but specifically with White and Holiday, the floor of what the most realistic scenario for this group is really high.
And here's a question for you, Will.
Yeah.
Would you say that last year's performance for Holiday and White was actually the best case scenario for last year? Like if we had done this exercise last year?
I think I would say it's tough, because I think I would say yes, because Derrick White is 100%. Like I wasn't expecting the season that we got from Derrick White, where we talked about, we were like, oh my God, is he our best player? Whereas with Jrue Holiday, I think I think there would be still room, if I were just looking at last year as a whole, that there's room where I was like, oh, because I was asking for Jrue Holiday to can you have a 20-point game? Because I'm worried that we might not get that. We might get to the postseason. You were not used to being assertive on offense.
Were you expecting 60% from the corners?
I wasn't expecting that. So that's what I mean. There's elements to it. So it's all within a certain degree. So I would say Derrick White last year, 100% hit whatever the best case scenario could have been. Jrue Holiday was probably 87% or somewhere in that range, 90%.
But when you factor in the playoffs and how he performed in peak moments, and same with Derrick White and Payton Pritchard, limited role, half court specialist, still hit the big shots. Like to me, we kind of got the best case scenario out of the backcourt last year. So I think it's actually realistic to expect a repeat performance from last year. I don't think there's any reason why any of these guys should get worse than last year. I think Holiday is really the only guy just because of his age, but I don't think he's at that point where there's going to be a.
But then it's also year 2 where he's now knows exactly where, like, you know what I mean? So there's also that factor in, so that kind of helps as well.
I think the backcourt's better this year than they were last year, man, to be honest with you. Unless just like the speed and talent around the league, it's just all of a sudden you're just like, holy shit, this league is so deep. And like even this amazing backcourt that we have is having trouble guarding some of these young guards in the NBA. I don't think that's going to happen, but that's at least like a possibility, because it's a long season, 82 game season. There were times last year where we were just like, man, even White and Holiday can't guard friggin' Darius Garland or somebody like that. You know what I mean? Like there's always those possibilities. But I think that this backcourt is going to be one of the strengths of this team. And I think it's going to be potentially the best backcourt in the NBA.
Yeah, and it's I have no questions about those top 3 guys that we've spent a lot of time on with White, Holiday, and Pritchard. And then I think to the last point you made of like, there's always going to be a Darius Garland, or as we've said, there's going to be a night where we need some more pop. That's where if this group turns into an A++, right? It's because, oh shit, Darius Garland's giving us trouble. Can Jaden Springer guard him for 10 minutes and he makes a difference in the game, causes a couple turnovers, reignites the energy in the crowd? Can that happen a handful of times throughout the season? Can there be a night where it's like, damn, just like we aren't shooting the ball well, nobody's putting the ball in the hoop? Can we get 15 minutes of Lonnie Walker and he gives us 10 points? Can we get that? Like, those take it to an A++, and there's the potential for that. So I'm with you. I think this is absolutely going to be one of the strongest points of this team, because not only do you have the upfront of the high floor of what Derrick White and Jrue Holiday bring, but then you have Payton Pritchard, and I think Payton Pritchard is a pretty sure bet. I know I mentioned the best case, worst case. I feel pretty confident in Payton Pritchard having a pretty good year, and I think this is going to be the part that we'll have to monitor throughout the year, is how much does winning a championship as well as bringing back your entire team. Like Lonnie Walker is like the biggest addition to this team that we're going to talk about in any of these segments. And everyone is so comfortable. Everyone is so united. Everyone knows their place. Now, of course, you have to worry about complacency with winning sometimes that happens as well. But I think there's also a level of, I'm not playing for my job every single night. Like, I know the rotation. I know where I'm going to be. I know where I'm going to get my looks. I don't have to worry if I'm Payton Pritchard and maybe one night I only get 2 shots and I go 0 for 2 from 3 and I play, 15 minutes. I'm not worried that shit. They're going to look at those numbers and say, maybe he doesn't play the next 2-3 nights or whatever it might be. That's not the case, right? So you can have a night to feel more free. And then the nights that you're hot, you can go 6 of 7, or you can go 7 of 10, and everyone's going to have your back. They're rooting for you to do it. So I do think there's a level of being more relaxed that can then take you to an even higher level. So I'm with you. I'm super high on this particular group. And despite the fact that we're going to talk about the wings that have Jalen and Jason, I'm with you. I think from top to bottom, the guards is potentially the strongest part of this team, which probably once again gets back to, is Derrick White our best player? Like that's kind of where it brings us back to, just because of the level of play that this group brings. But that was fun. I like doing that. Best case, worst case, most realistic case. And then the final part that we're going to end each of these previews with is a training camp battle or training camp storyline. This is Greg. This is your moment here. Training camp battles, training camp storylines. Let's look at the guards. What's most interesting to you, or what do you think we should be looking for here in training camp and into the preseason?
Okay, I have one serious one, which is Lonnie Walker versus Jaden Springer. I think one of those guys makes the roster. I've already planted my flag on the Lonnie Walker Island. I don't think Jaden Springer makes his team. I like him as a player. I just don't think he fits. I think they figure out a way to give him an opportunity elsewhere, much like they did with homeboy Lance. What was his name again?
I don't know who you're going with here.
Oh my God. He was one of my favorite players. Lamar Stevens.
Lamar Stevens. Yeah. Well, the reason I couldn't get it is there's no guy named Lance, but yes,
there was no guy named Lance. Lamar Stevens. I liked Lamar Stevens, but he didn't fit on this team, right? And they were able to move off of him.
Yeah, he got the pop of the Grizzlies a little bit.
Delano Banton, right? They gave Delano Banton a chance and they moved him.
Also
I liked
Delano
Banton. Yeah, so I think Jaden Springer is one of those guys, but I think Lonnie Walker is the guy that makes the team. And then my sort of fun thing with Lonnie Walker is, how many times do we ask each other if Lonnie Walker reminds us of Ricky Davis?
Okay, I love this one. And also, especially because after Lonnie Walker had like the weekend hair, right? When he first came into the league. And that was 100% like how I kind of identified him, was just like, oh yeah, Lonnie Walker's on the court. He's got the big ass weekend hair. Very, very obvious. And when he shaved it off, honestly, like, because his playing time in San Antonio, and then he started to bop around a little bit more sparse. Yeah, it's like I don't really know how to think of it, and I don't know what his number is going to be. Is there number 12 in the Celtics right now? I don't think so, right? Is there a number 12? Am I skipping over anybody?
I don't know.
We got to make this happen. We got to make Lonnie Walker number 12, because I would love some more Ricky Davis references. And honestly, if you could bottle up Ricky Davis and kind of put him into like a concentrated and under control 12 to 15 minutes. Pretty nice player to have,
Yeah,
right? A
without the
guy that
ego.
without the ego, with that athleticism, with the ability to fill it up, like that would be a pretty damn good year from Lonnie Walker if we could get that, 50 games, 50, 60 games, 12 to 15 minutes, and is, averaging overall, probably 7, 8 points, but comes in, get you 10,
Al
10 points or so. Like
Also,
that's
a guy
fantastic.
who's looking at it like all I could get was a freaking Exhibit 10 training camp offer. That's what
Yeah.
was out there for me. He's on like a prove it year for himself. So you're getting a super motivated Lonnie Walker who is like, you know what? If I can't be the starting shooting guard that I hoped I was going to be getting drafted, maybe I could at least prove to everybody that I can be a winning player on one of the best teams in the NBA. And then all of a sudden, Lonnie Walker's in the league for another 10 years instead of playing in Europe for the rest of his life.
Yeah, I like that, man. I think Lonnie Walker, without a doubt, out of this group, is the one to keep an eye on. The him versus Jaden Springer will be interesting because I think both of them have a chance to be on this team when they leave camp. I agree with you that by the end of the year, there's no chance both of them are still on this team. That part I agree with.
Yeah.
I think
I
out of
just I
camp
just
there's a
don't
good
think
chance,
with
but
Springer though, Will. I don't think with Springer, anytime you ask yourself, how much does Jaden Springer's shot look like Semi Ojeley's shot? Like that's not a good thing. That's not a good comparison
it
to be making.
when I was putting together our show notes here about like what I was going to hit on, and I put Kun Springer, can he hit open threes at a mid-30s clip? Semi Ojeleye was the first guy that came to my mind, and I always go back to that compilation of Jason Tatum when it was like Jason Tatum can't pass. Oh, really? Here's 5 minutes of him hitting Semi Ojeleye with wide open shots that are not going in, but he hit 35% because he's so open. And yeah, unfortunately, Semi Ojeleye continues to get strays here on Green with Envy. Just year 5, we can't get away from the Semi Ojeleye strays. But yeah, you're right. You're right. I absolutely see the comparisons to that, the defensive presence, the strength. I don't know. Jaden Springer stood out to me so much because I think we played Philly like 3 times in the preseason last
Mhm.
year. It felt like a lot, and he stood out to me, and I was like, damn, who's this Jaden Springer guy? I kind of like maybe he's gonna be a role guy. And he never really turned into much in Philly, but I know when he got traded to the Celtics, all of a sudden there was a bunch of talk where Philly fans were like, what the hell? Why did we just give Jaden Springer to the
Mhm.
Celtics? So when another fan base isn't that much of an uproar over a guy that was barely in their rotation and wasn't really playing, there's a little something there. So there is some intrigue that I have with Jaden Springer, but I'm with you. I think Lonnie Walker just fits a need, whereas Jaden Springer is kind of excess riches when it comes to, having even more defensive versatility.
Yeah.
But I do think, it would be interesting if you could put together like your most athletic lineup for the Celtics. What do you think that looks like, Greg? Like just your most
Pure
athletic lineup.
athleticism. Like I'm
Yeah.
not worried about how many baskets we score.
Mm. Right, right. So, well, let me ask you this. Okay, so out of these guards we're talking about, Jaden Springer's probably the most athletic, correct?
Yeah, I mean, he's got the most explosive spring at this point, but D White is like a sneaky great athlete. Jrue Holiday is a sneaky great athlete. Jrue Holiday's got the best instincts of everybody here, and just in terms of being able to anticipate, like in
Mhm.
anticipation is part of athleticism. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like the ability. I
That's fair.
I don't know.
I'm thinking of like, in my head, there's a world in which we have a lineup that has
Oh, you're talking
Springer and
layup line athleticism.
well, if it has like it's okay. So in my mind, I was thinking this would be kind of fun. I don't know if it actually works, but there's a team or a lineup with Springer, with Jalen Brown, with Nemias Queta, and like I'm just talking about your most raw athletic team that you can put out there. And
Mhm.
like honestly, and you probably have to fill that with like maybe Derrick White and Sam Hauser to get some shooting and spacing out there. But just like what would that look like as far as just a different look? Like, I think that's all we're talking about here is once
Yeah.
again what are different looks that the Celtics can throw out and like Springer could, in theory, be a part of. Hey, we're gonna go to almost like a Shaka Smart Havoc lineup here, where we're just
Uh,
gonna go chaos athleticism.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
and
yeah.
once again, this is much more
To
towards
me,
a bright best case scenario for Springer, which is unlikely to exist if I'm being very real.
I don't think there's any chance that lineup ever like actually shows itself. To me, the more interesting thing for my brain is just like if I were playing these 5 guys or this team in pickup, and I saw these guys going through layup lines on the other side, which guys would scare me the most without seeing them actually play basketball? I feel like Jaden Springer would definitely be near the top of that list. I'd be like, I don't want that guy guarding me, and I don't want to cover that guy because he's just so goddamn athletic. I actually think Lonnie Walker would probably be on that list too.
Yeah, but it's the NBA, and almost every team can do some form of layup line that's going to strike fear into any men's league team. But this was fun, Greg. I like doing this. Training camp.
We're back, baby.
Training camp battles. We're back, man. We're getting into that rhythm here. And so we'll be back next week. We may have a few guests lined up. We'll try to see what we can do. But for sure, we're going to make sure that we continue on this same format. We'll hit you with the wings, and we'll hit you with the big men as well. Those are going to be fun here. But Greg, any final thoughts here before I send us out?
Trying to figure out what the new outro music is going to be for the pod, because I really liked the Feels Like Summer, which is Black Sheep Optimists' most recent release, actually like being during the summertime. But now that we're getting back into the season, I kind of want to find a song that more appropriately fits the outro here. So be on the lookout for that, audience. I'm going to try and find something that works.
I'm going to put a challenge out. Nothing may come of it. I'm going to put a challenge to our audience here. Go to the Black Sheep Optimist catalog on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever it is. I know you guys are having some beef with Apple. I don't know if that's settled or not, but go find their catalog and send us a message of what you think from the Black Sheep Optimist catalog would make for the best outro music. And we'll see if we get any responses. Maybe that will help us figure out what it should be. So,
or I just find out that everybody hates our music and no one responds.
If you don't like their shit, keep it to yourself. That's how it should be. But that'll do it for this episode of Green with Envy. As always, we appreciate you guys. Make sure you like and subscribe to us on YouTube, and then of course, always hit us up and follow us on our social media accounts. That'll do it. We'll be back next week with a few more episodes for you. Until then, take it easy. Celtics coming back. September 24th is Media Day. We got you covered. Peace.
It feels like summer, baby. Oh, mama, feel like summer. New season got me seeing new colors. So fly, the sky will kiss you. Lips so smooth and miss your issues. Oh, mama, feel like summer. New season got me seeing new colors. Oh, my, I'm slipping into white lies and time to miss you. Now you're 3 shots deep that you chase with the Croy. You're looking at me while you're making that noise. I've been trying to stay clean, but